Good morning. Thank you for tuning into Facebook Live to hear my story. My name is Ernest Fruehauf, and I'm a Holocaust survivor. Actually, thank God, a fortunate one. My family arrived in the United States in August of 1941. I lived in a little town, little city, Kitzingen, on the Main River in the middle of Bavaria, central Germany. The first map should show that. Würzburg, the city that's circled here, that's the city where actually I was born in the hospital, a few miles from the town of Kitzingen, which is shown in the next slide. It's just a little bit to the southeast. You see it here, to the southeast of the big city of Würzburg. It's on the Main River. It had a population then of about 14,000. One half of the population was evangelical Lutheran. The other half was Roman Catholic. There were about, as I said, 14,000 people in this town. And at that time in 1930-ish, thereabouts, there were probably about 300 Jewish people still lived in the community. I think at one time it had way over 400, but not anymore at that time. And of course, with the political issues and Hitler on the horizon, people began to leave if and when they could. The next slide shows where we lived. Well, it shows a picture of Kitzingen. This is taken from the other side of the river, the Main River. And you see here the three major religious institutions. To the right, you see the two towers of the Catholic Church and the Evangelical Lutheran Church. And right in front of you were the two little towers, the domes. It was the synagogue. This is a synagogue that was dedicated in the late 1800s, about 1882. It was, of course, put on fire on Kristallnacht, November 10th, 1938. The inside was totally burned out. Most of the roof was destroyed, but it was rebuilt as an auditorium used for lectures and musical concerts and so on. It's called the synagogue. It's still in use, but there are no Jewish people left in this town at all right now. We were there, my wife and I went there in 1993 when the city, the state of Bavaria and the German government had a rededication of this building. There's a small synagogue chapel-like built into the bottom, into the basement, to as a reminder that at one time it was a Jewish house of worship. But as I said, there are no Jewish people left there. Now let's see, the next slide is the street I lived on. The first building on the right-hand side is the end of it. It was a cafe, like a large Starbucks, Frankenberger, which was my grandfather's last name. It was a first-rate Starbucks business. They had very good coffee made from coffee beans. You could get Coca-Cola. You could come in here, sit down, have all kinds of cakes, ice cream. You could drink Coca-Cola, coffee, tea. They even had a pool table. You could play cards. People could come in and read newspapers from all over the country, sit around and talk. We had waitresses. It was a very well-known institution. And I've met people in this country, Jewish, as it turns out, who went to the university in Würzburg and actually visited here, and they remember the cafe very well. So I grew up here. I enjoyed my early years. I loved chocolate, and when I was a little boy, I wasn't at all shy. My mother used to teach me little folk songs, which I sang. People would come to me and they'd say, Ernst, sing me a song, and I would sing a song. By the time I was 5 or 6, I became totally shy, and you couldn't get a word out of me anymore. But I had a very good time as a youngster. My grandfather, of course, doted on me. He'd buy me trains and cars and all kinds of toys, which the Germans were good at manufacturing in those days anyway, in the early 30s. I didn't know what was going on in the outside world. My parents wouldn't literally made an effort to make sure I didn't learn, talk about what was going on outside. And quite frankly, I didn't realize too much until I was really in school and started learning. Now, let's see, the next slide shows some more things about the confectionery and the cafe, which you see here. It was mainly the ground floor, but also the right-hand side of the second floor. Groups could come in here and have meetings and drink coffee and eat cake and everything else at the same time. We lived on the second floor to the left-hand side. In the right-hand side, you see a typical coffee cup and a plate, which were, of course, in use at the in the cafe. And we also had knives and spoons, forks, mostly forks and spoons with the name Cafe Frankenberger on them. And this was going on pretty much all year. Interestingly enough, I don't want to spend too much time on it. There are enough Jewish people in the area that my folks, for the festival of Passover, where you couldn't use foods that were prepared with some kind of a rising agent, fermentation agent, they actually had a separate bakery and they had separate dishes they would serve Jewish people just for that 1 week of Passover every spring. So there were in the area about 125 small synagogues in all the little towns. And I remember a rabbi telling me, who lived there in the 30s, that you could walk from little village to village and you could hear Jewish people singing their Sabbath songs on Friday night. He told me there were at least 125 of those because he was a district rabbi there back in the 30s. So Jewish life was pretty common and pretty prevalent in the area. And obviously we had a lot of Jewish customers. My grandfather advertised, for instance, his Passover products right before he even purchased this building and established this cafe back in the late 1800s. And when we went back to Germany for the rededication of the synagogue, one of our friends, as he became later on, gave me a copy of an advertisement in a German Jewish paper, which was at that time exactly 100 years old. And my grandfather in this paper advertised his kosher for Pesach products, which he said he would deliver as soon as possible at reasonable prices. My grandfather was my idol. He was a very how should I put it, honest and decent man. And of course, he was about 67 years old, 65 years old when the Nazis came to power. And he was a very sensitive man. And one day, walking on the street, this was after Hitler came in 1933, and he saw one of his customers, not Jewish, and he took his hat off, as was usually done, and said, "Good morning, Herr so-and-so," and the man went past him and just to spit at him. And my grandfather, after that, was never quite the same. Anyway, let's go on here. The next picture is, well, it shows the front of the cafe. My father, on the left is a tall man. My mother's father is Mr. Frankenberger, is the shorter man on the right-hand side. This is a front. You can see the display of chocolates and all kinds of cakes and things that they sold in this cafe. Next, let's see. Yes, this is a picture of the synagogue as it looked originally. You see the dome is a little bit different because this was the original before it was very much damaged in 1938. It was dedicated about 1882 or 83. There'll be some more pictures later. Okay, next picture is the interior, the front door, the front of the synagogue. It had a beautifully designed wallpaper on the entrance, the foyer into this sanctuary. And of course, the last time I saw it was in 1938, when I was 9 years old. After November 10th, when it was destroyed, I didn't see it again. So when they rededicated the synagogue, the German government, the Bavarian government, Jewish people donated money to rebuild the institution. And they found the drawings, and they actually replaced that front foyer, the walls, with this newspaper. So when I walked in, I was at the front door in 1993, I literally froze. Okay, let's see, what's next? Basically I started school, of course, and I was ready for first grade. I was 6 years old in 1935. And here is a picture of me. My father took this picture of me, and I have in my left hand that long conical tube, which was given to every first grade child back in Germany in those days. I don't know if they do it today. And they filled the tube with cookies and candies and probably fruits and things, because they said, now you're leaving you're starting out one of the greatest journeys in your life, your education. So it should be a sweet experience. And they gave you this tube full of sweets to make you think about the wonderful journey you were going on. So this is me, age 6, in about March of 1935. School started in the spring rather than in the fall in this country. So this was right near my birthday when I was 6 years old. Okay, next picture. This is along with the synagogue, there was also a Jewish community building. And in this building, there were apartments upstairs, and downstairs, just behind the bushes here, were the classrooms. There were 8 grades, no more than about 30 children, because it wasn't that large a community. And we had, when I started here as a first grader, I was the only first grader in that school. By the early 30s, middle 30s, there were no more than about 30 Jewish children, ages 6 to what would you call 8th grade, which be about 14, 15. And we had basically two classrooms. We had a number of teachers. I remember my first teacher was a young lady, and since it was a Jewish parochial school, they also taught Hebrew. Unfortunately, Hebrew is a language. Unfortunately, the young lady who was my teacher the first year was fortunate enough to get a passport to Palestine. Today it's called Israel. But she had a Palestinian passport, which was given by the British for her to go over to the Holy Land, and she settled there, became a teacher, but she taught Hebrew. The next teacher, who was then responsible for me in about the 2nd grade, he also began to start teaching me a little bit of Hebrew, but he was another one of those fortunate people who managed to get into Palestine with a British passport. So I was then out of luck. There were no more Hebrew teachers around anymore. And so I never learned Hebrew as a spoken language. Okay, what is next? Yes, one of the things I want to show you here, this is really not part of my German collection at all because I never got there. This is a postcard, which is a miniature of a poster that was shown in an exhibition in the German southern city of Munich. And it was dedicated, it was not dedicated, it was created to teach the German population about the evils of Judaism and the terrible things that these Jewish people represented. Now, the whole idea of hate is so obnoxious. It's such a terrible idea that you wonder why we don't spend time teaching children never to learn to hate. I know it's more easily said than done, but somewhere along the line, either our governments or our religious institutions or parents or somebody has to be teaching hate. You're not born with it. But once you're impregnated with this hate idea, you'll never get over it. You will never get over it. I tell all the school children, don't ever pick it up. Do not hate any religion, any race, any nationality, because there is no such thing. God did not create us that way, where each of these institutions are either good or bad. They're all human beings, and you can't separate them. Once you pick up a hatred of some group, you'll never get over it. It'll be with you forever. They've tested German citizens who lived quite a few years after the Hitler period, and they still had this hatred of the Jews in their system. What is so interesting is these Nazis, particularly Joseph Goebbels, who was the head of the propaganda department of the Reich, it's evil incarnated. It's unbelievable. Anyway, what did they do? They were extremely talented, but talented in the most negative way. This particular poster is titled "The Eternal Jew." What is interesting is the words are German, but the letters are Hebrew letters. So you would read it in German, and it says in German, "The Eternal Jew." This was a huge exhibition to teach the nation about the evils of Judaism. And I think at this exhibition, if I remember correctly, there were hundreds of thousands of Germans who visited that exhibition in the city of of Nuremberg. No, I got it right yet. Neither one. They're all the same, but in the city of Munich in southern Germany. It's only a few miles from Hitler's first concentration camp, which was Dachau. Anyhow, what's so interesting about this? What does it teach people? It teaches people nothing else but hate. And you could hate in any way or form, you could find a way to hate the Jews. That's why no one knows what is anti-Semitism. It's just plain hatred of the Jewish people for any reason you want. If you notice, this man in his right hand has gold coins. That's because Jews are millionaires. Someone says, oh, wait a minute, the Jews I know, I think they're communists. Says, of course, you see under his left arm is this stone with a hammer and sickle on it. And if you look at it carefully, that stone is the the outline of Germany. It's the outline of Germany. And they said, well, this man is trying to convert Germany into a communist country. Says, well, somebody says, well, I don't know. I don't like Jews, but I don't know if I know anything about capitalism, Bolshevism. I hate them because they're going to beat us up. That, of course, you see in his left hand is this horsewhip. He can whip you if you don't like him. And then someone else says, well, I think it's even worse. I mean, look at the way this guy looks. I wouldn't want to deal with people like that. Well, who looks like this? I've never met anybody who looks like that. Do you remember that picture of my father? He looks more like a 100% German than this kind of an individual. Hitler, if you look at his face, looks more like this creature than any Jewish people I've ever known. But people, when they're filled with hate, will pick this up and they'll swallow it hook, line, and sinker. So you have to be very careful. I always tell school children never to pick up any ideas such as hate, because it's nothing but a totally destructive characteristic, and you want to avoid it at all costs. It's true you can hate somebody's behavior if you don't behave well, but that's an individual. It's nothing to do with any group whatsoever. Okay, next. Okay, here's now what happened was, I should mention, first of all, when I went to school, walked there every day to the school from my cafe, it was about half a mile. I never had a problem until the Jewish children were pointed out, and the schools were teaching the students by law who these Jewish people are in town. You got to get to know them, the teacher said. And so pretty soon they got to know who we were. And so on the way to school in the morning, I found myself having to defend myself against vastly outnumbered students who tried to beat me up. Well, to make a long story short, we started school 15 minutes later, and we ended school 15 minutes earlier so we could get home before the popular kids, the regular school children in the town were let out of school. Okay, so anyway, things became such that every year some new ideas came up that made life more difficult. We couldn't go to the park anymore because the benches and the swings said no Jews allowed. We couldn't go to a circus anymore if it came to town. We couldn't go to movie theaters. Each year, new things were outlawed for us that we couldn't attend. And it got to the point where in November 1938, November the 10th, there was an incident where the Germans decided they needed to get rid of the Jews, but nobody, of course, in those days wanted to have any immigrants. And so what happened was they had to find a way to reduce the population. So what happened was around the 9th or so of November 1938, one of the Jewish boys who lived in Paris, whose parents were just picked up one day by the Nazi government, and he and his family and some 20,000 other Jewish people who had come into Germany from Poland or the East after the First World War, they just took them, put them on trucks, shipped them to the Polish border, and threw them out of the trucks and left them there. And their son was living in Paris, and he got angry. He bought himself a pistol, and he went into the German consulate or the embassy, whatever. And the first officer he ran into, he shot him. The man died of his wounds within a day. And of course, that gave Goebbels and Goering and Hitler and the whole organization a good reason to beat up on the Jewish people in Germany. So every town that any Jewish people, the population went wild. They would destroy their homes. They would destroy their furniture, their bedding. In our case, it was 7 o'clock in the morning, I remember, something like that. I woke up to a tremendous amount of noise outside, and I didn't know what was going on. My mother pulled me away from the window, and it turned out that the whole group of younger people had crashed into the front door of the cafe and destroyed everything. And I mean everything, because my mother and I went down to the store, to the cafe in the evening after it was dark, and there was nothing there. The chairs were smashed, the tables were broken up in part, all of the cupboards were empty. We heard in the noise already in the morning that the people who broke in broke all of the cutlery. The cups were gone, the dishes were gone. I don't know what happened to the knives and or rather the forks and the spoons. I have no idea, but there was nothing left. The only thing we found that was still edible at all was a chocolate rabbit. My folks also, as I said, sold chocolate products. And in one of the corners of one of the cupboards, there was a small rabbit still there in aluminum foil. And I said to my mother, we better save this for my brother Norbert for his birthday, which was the following month in December. So he was then 38. He was then 6 years old. So we have a birthday present for him. But that was the end of the cafe. What happened next then after all this noise, I thought, well, things quieted down. And then the noise got even worse. A bunch of, I don't remember if they were policemen or Gestapo people, I don't know who they were, but they came storming up to the second floor and they hollered for my grandfather and my father to get their coats and to come with them immediately. And they took them about a block away to the city jail, and they kept them there. We didn't know what was going to happen next. Things were quiet after that. My mother went over there to find out how her husband and her father were doing. Well, they gave they gave my mother her father back and said, take him home. He's too old. They only arrested Jewish people between the ages of 16 and 60. My grandfather rather, was already, I think, around 65. Anyway, she took him home. By that time, as I said, he was beginning to fail. He had diabetes, and he also began to show signs of senility. So she took him home. And my father, no, we don't know what's going to happen to him. They told him, you don't worry about him. Take your father and get out of here. And they were very courteous, throw him out. So anyhow, we got worried. What was going to happen next? So the best we could do, we dragged our bedroom furniture from the second floor up to the attic. So in case some group came in again and started attacking, who knows what they would do next. So we thought we'd at least have some little space for protection. And we began to sleep up in the attic from then on. Of course, the business was totally gone. We also found out that the synagogue had been put on fire. And this is a picture of it. Somebody gave me who lived in the town. He took this picture. This was on the morning of November the 10th, 1938. They put the synagogue on fire. They also destroyed the interior of the school. So I couldn't go to school either until we brought carpenters in and repaired everything. And of course, the great Hermann Goering, that wonderful leader of Germany, he said, well, we have to get that repaired, but we'll make the Jews pay for it. So they had to pay for all the repairs. And then they charged them additional money just to help support the Nazi government. They were never short of funds. All they had to do was just rob the Jews of whatever little they had. It is very strange when you think about it. Germany had a population of about 65, 70 million people. 65, 70 million people. Of that total, all the Jews in Germany amounted to less than 1 million. They were never more than about 550,000. By that time, 1938, the number of them had already been able to leave, were able to go to some other country. So there were, at that time, already maybe no more than 300,000 or 400,000 Jews in all of Germany. Yet these few people were responsible for all the troubles of the German nation. It's unbelievable. If you start reading history of what Jews had actually contributed, it is unbelievable. They blamed the Jews, which I had learned, of course, for losing the First World War, which is sheer nonsense, because the only way they could fight a war is you had to have gunpowder. Gunpowder is made from ammonium nitrate. The only way they could get ammonium nitrate was from South America, but the British had a blockade, so they couldn't bring in the ammonium nitrate. So they had to find a way of doing it themselves. How did they do it? Because there was a German Jewish chemist who got the patent, the first world patent, to make ammonia from nitrogen. Nitrogen was almost impossible to convert into any other chemicals. And he found a way to do it just before the First World War. In Germany, not only didn't the Jews lose the war, they couldn't even have fought the First World War if this Jewish man hadn't found a way to make ammonia. He found it he developed this method not because necessarily gunpowder. What he was thinking about was feeding the world, because today I have read that of all the billions of people, there'd probably be 2 billion who couldn't exist today if you didn't have ammonia, which is a major fertilizer in the agricultural industry to grow food. So anyway, it just shows the total idiocy behind hatred. There's no value to it whatsoever. But we can talk about it. Who knows who ultimately really believes it? Anyway, what else do I want to say? Let's go on from here. My father was taken to Auschwitz. Not Auschwitz. Sorry, excuse me. He was taken to the prison near the concentration camp near Munich. He was taken to what's it called? Dachau. He was taken to Dachau. Excuse me, my age is getting to the point where I don't remember things. He was taken to the Dachau concentration camp in late November. And of course, one thing I didn't mention is in 1938, we were required to sell the bakery, the building. Jewish people couldn't own a business anymore. So a bank wanted to purchase the building, but the Nazi government wouldn't allow them to buy it because even though they wanted to pay a full assessed valuation, the government wouldn't allow it because the owners weren't high enough in the Nazi party. So they gave it the building instead to a beer brewer who was high up in the Nazi party. His name was Kesselring. He was in fact Adolf Kesselring, same name, cousin of the head of the German army. Later on, the Americans, the British, had to fight in Italy, Adolf Kesselring. So they gave him the building and they said, well, pay him half. And there wasn't anything you could do about it. You took half of what they gave you and that was it. So now my father was in Dachau. It's now the end of November, early December. And by that time, I think the school had opened again, but we had nothing, we couldn't do anything. One day, Mr. Kesselring came to the door and he said to my mother, when are you people moving out? I want to convert this place to a beer hall. You see, what I hadn't mentioned was that in the meantime, Hitler had, of course, built up his army. He built a whole spanking new army base outside of town. It was made of hundreds of half-track vehicles, each one manned by maybe at least 10 men. And these were pulling German manufactured 88mm artillery guns. It was a major military installation. And here they had all these soldiers. They wanted to go to a bar on weekends and enjoy beer. So Mr. Kesselring, who was a beer brewer, had everything right up his sleeve, and he wanted us to get out of there so you convert this destroyed cafe into a beer hall. Well, my mother said, I'm sorry, we can't move yet. He says, why not? He says, well, I have a father and a mother who are old and not in very good health. I have 3 children and my husband isn't here. Oh, where's your husband? He says, well, he's in Dachau. So he says, I'll see what I can do. So my mother got a little worried. What was going to happen here? So she was a little woman, not much more than 4 feet tall, and she decided to go to the police department and find out about her husband. So she walked in to see the head of the police department, and he said to her in very, polite manner, what are you doing here? What do you want? She says, well, I want to know when my husband is coming home because Mr. Kesselring wants us to move out. That's none of your business. Get out of here before we throw you out. So, of course, we're straight back and smile on her face. She went back home. And fortunately, about a week or so later, there was a knock on the door about, I don't know, it must have been 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. And we welcomed him home and we took him upstairs. I remember Mother and I, we sat down with Father. He looked terrible. He was 6 feet tall. He was a very strong man. He started out working to learn the bakery trade at age 13. His hands were so powerful, he could mix a whole batch of water, yeast, and flour to make bread. And he looked like he'd lost about 20 pounds in those 4 weeks. He couldn't talk about what's happening there because the SS, the guards told him, if you talk about what we did to you here, we'll bring your whole family here. You'll never see the life of day again. So we sat down and my father said, we have to get out of Germany, try as hard as we can, because if we do not get out, these people are so evil, they'll kill us. Mother said, what are you really talking about? What do you mean kill us? We've been living it all of our lives. So what are they going to do? Take us out on the street and shoot us? And I remember my father said, no, they don't have to do that. They can put us in trucks and take us out of town and find a source for poison gas somewhere, and they can kill us with gas. Mother said, you're kidding. What do you mean gas? I said, well, look, in the First World War, they used poison gas. What's the difference? These people know about all that. If they want to get rid of us, they'll get rid of us very easily, and nobody's going to do anything about it. Well, my father was a very bright and a very committed man. He wrote to my one family member we had in the United States, my mother's aunt, my grandfather's sister, and through her, we got the family and friends to put money together to get a visa. They gave us a number, but then you had to figure out how you're going to get the visa. So you were required to have money put aside in some kind of an escrow account that would allow you to apply for a visa. So the government, of course, did all it could to keep people out. There was a depression, and there wasn't any particularly love for Jews anywhere else in the world either. So it took a while, but the following spring, enough money was put aside to support us in the event my father couldn't get a job. And we were told, okay, now you've met all the requirements for getting a visa, but you know, there's a limit. We have a quota. We can only allow so many people in, and your number isn't going to come up till maybe May of 1941. So that's 2 years away. Says, that's right. I'm sorry, it's all we can do. And it is amazing that they had it all set the way they had it all set up. So my father said, well, we're not going to sit around. Let's see if we can go somewhere else. So of course, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. We couldn't go to Palestine because the Arabs said, the British said, oh, the Arabs are going to be upset. We can't take you into Palestine. The Australians said, oh, we've taken enough Jews in already. If we take in any more, we're going to have anti-Semitism like Germany. The best answer came from Canada. The head of the Canadian Immigration Department, I think his name was Blair, he said, for one thing, he said, 0 is one too many. He told the agents who asked him about giving some visas. His answer was 0 is one too many. And the answer we actually got, I wish my father had kept the letter, but what the letter said was, we have no room. Can you imagine? Canada, we have no room. The story was told about a couple that went to a travel agent to try to come to the United States or somewhere and they in this world, and they couldn't, the travel agent couldn't find anything that was easily to get into. So the family said, well, do you have another globe? That's the kind of humor you have to live through this kind of stuff. Anyway, I can talk for another half hour, which I don't want to do, about what happened, but we were lucky. My father was put to work for the German Socialist Party, collecting garbage to feed pigs, which they were raising in town to have extra money. The synagogue was now, the services were held in part of the community building, which I showed you before, which was used for the school and also had other rooms. We had to move there from our building because it was turned over to Mr. Kesselring. And fortunately, by the time we got to May 1941, we were able to get our visa. And then after we got that, we then had to get tickets to get to a neutral port, because by that time, the German army had already occupied most of Europe, and they were already 200 miles from Moscow when we were able to leave by train from Berlin. 5 days it took us to get to Lisbon, the one open port. And from Lisbon, we got to this country on August 9th of 1941. We were very lucky, and let's say thank God and thank my father and thank the USA for saving our lives. I think I'll stop at this point and maybe ask, have some questions. Oh, there's one other thing. Sorry, I never stopped this picture here. I should point out, what is this picture doing here? What happened was, when we went back to Germany in 1993, I found a store where they had pictures of old Kitzingen. And when I came across this picture, I must have gasped, because the owner said, oh, I have to show you this. The Nazi party, when they put this on fire, by the way, the chief Nazi in this town was the doctor, the chief doctor of Kitzingen. And he put the synagogue on fire. Well, it didn't burn the southern turret. So at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they came back and they burned it a second time on this end to make sure this turret was also destroyed. I remember years ago, a little girl asked me, she said, are you sure there was a doctor that did this? I said, oh yes, I am sure, because I have a friend who grew up in this city, in this town. He's not Jewish, but he saw what happened in these years. And he told me that after the war, the doctor was brought to court and they sent him to prison for 3 months because he instigated the burning down of the synagogue. It was only one of about 200 something that were destroyed that day in November 1938 all over Germany. Well, I think I'll end at this point and open it up for questions. Hopefully we get lots of questions in the next 20 minutes.
Thank you so much for sharing. I do have a couple of questions. Let me get to this first one. Courtney's asked, what was your grandfather's name and what do you remember most about family life with him?
My grandfather's name was, actually his given name was Benjamin. His last name was Frankenberger. We called, his shortened name was Benno Frankenberger. I tried to learn as much about him as I could. Well, first of all, of course, I lived with him for some years, although toward the end of his life, he became pretty senile. He basically had Alzheimer's. Interestingly enough, he passed away. We took my grandparents to a Jewish old age home in this big city of Würzburg when we left for the United States. And he died, we found out later, on the day we landed in New York. He was 72 years old. I learned a lot of things about him. I found out he was a very honorable man. He was totally honest, almost to the point of where some people were telling me he was really becoming obnoxious. If people want to play cards, for example, he had used decks that he gave to anybody to play, provided they played for nothing more than pennies. If people want to play cards for serious money, he would not allow them to use those decks because he was afraid somebody might mark them so somebody could tell who had what cards. So you then had to buy a new deck of cards. He was very honest. He ran a very how should I say, literally a religious business institution, because he wanted to make sure that he treated all of his customers and all the people he had to deal with, particularly when it came to financial matters, he treated them totally honestly. He believed in the idea, which is a basic Jewish belief, that how should I put this? After you pass away, the first thing that you get asked when you get to heaven is, how did you treat your friends or people, especially in business? Did you treat them honorably? And my grandfather would pass 100%. Anyway, he bought me toys. I guess he thought I was God's gift to mankind, because I know he loved me as much as I loved him.
Thank you.
Next question.
He sounds wonderful. What was your experience like when you first came to the U.S.?
Oh, well, yes, it was a joy, to put it mildly. When we first got off the ship, I could talk on it for an hour about the ship. That's something else again. When we first got off the ship, we went to New Haven, Connecticut, but my mother had a younger uncle, my grandfather's younger brother, who, by the way, had the same kind of a business that he had in the city of Schweinfurt. And my aunt, was his wife, she wanted to get me acclimated to America. So whenever she went shopping in those 2 weeks we spent there, grocery store, drugstore, she always took me along, and she told the people, of course, whom she knew were there, the people at the counter, whatever, this is my little nephew, he's here just came from Germany. And of course, the first question is, oh, how do you like America? Now you realize I was only here a day or two, but it turned out in Germany we had a member of the community, a Jewish member, who was in the First World War. He was in the intelligence service, so he knew English. So he would teach us the British English, but it was good enough when someone said to me, how do you like America? I knew what was being said, and I could answer, very nice, thank you. So that's how I started learning English. I walked around the city of New Haven a little bit where they lived just to see things. And it was interesting because I have certain perceptions of what neighborhoods should look like based on my experience in Germany. So I was surprised. I would walk past large houses with beautiful lawns, and there were two things missing. I said to my uncle, I don't understand it. There's a beautiful lawns here, they're nice and green, but there's no sign that says, please stay off the grass. That's one of the German customs I remember. The other thing was I had trouble finding house numbers. It is a problem I have to this day. I don't go anywhere. If I have to go somewhere in the evening, it's a certain street with a certain number. I first look at a map. I don't believe in these automatic directions, and try to find out how to get there so I wouldn't have to stop. I was always afraid of having to walk up to houses, see what the numbers are, and then have the police come and sue me on with peeping Tom. So, so anyway, this is one of the things I noticed. No house numbers, no signs on the grass. But the other thing that was interesting is my uncle said, you know, why don't you walk around? Or if you go a couple more blocks, there's a beautiful city park there, and they have children's toys there. You can go on swings. So I said, okay, I'll go over there. So it's around noontime, and I'm sitting on this swing, and all of a sudden, 3 or 4 boys start coming toward me. And I said, oh my gosh, what are they going to do? Are these like the ones I met in Germany, or this can't be? What's going on here? So they came up to me, and they I guess because of the sunlight, I had a watch which my father had bought me for my bar mitzvah, and the light was reflected off of it, and all they wanted to know was what time it was. I said, thank God I'm in America. So that's things that I remember. I remember this. The other thing was that what was one of the greatest things that happened to me over here was the library. My cousin in Green Bay, where we went, my mother's sister lived there. She took me to the library the very first day at Branch Library, had me sign up. And I said, well, I have no money. She said, you don't need money. I don't need money. No, you don't need money. You can take out 4 or 5 books. You have 2 weeks to read them. When you get through with them, you bring them back. You can get 4 or 5 more books. Oh, well, this is fantastic. I never saw anything like that. What this brings to mind something that happened some years ago. I was invited to talk to a high school of about 600 students, which kind of scared me to start off with. But they asked to talk about my experiences in Germany and coming to this country. And one of the students asked, what was one of the best things that happened to you when you got over here? Well, there were a lot of things, but I said, you know, the greatest thing, because books in Germany, paper in general, was very expensive. We learned arithmetic not by writing down 2 + 2 = 4, but we had to learn the multiplication tables by memory. We had to be able to subtract and add numbers. It was all drilled because you didn't have paper to write these things down on. You had to know all this stuff. And I mentioned that. And I also mentioned the fact that here was this library that I could go to, check out all the books I wanted to, learn all I wanted to. It was basically an unlimited gem. And after between the morning and the afternoon sessions, after lunch, a young woman came up to me and she gave me a big hug and a kiss. And I said, wow. I said, thank you. What was that for? She says, I am the high school librarian. That was the best advertisement I've had in 5 years. Okay, next question.
Once in the US, how did you get information about your grandparents and other family members who were in Germany?
Yeah, yes, okay, that's in some ways a sad story. We found out that as I mentioned, my grandfather passed away the day we landed in New York. We got a letter through the Red Cross. I think we found out in October or November when that actually had taken place. We did not find out about our grandmother, but we knew she couldn't possibly have survived the war. She wasn't in terribly good health anyway. And we were told that she passed away sometime in early March of 1942. Why? They couldn't tell us anything. And one woman said, better you don't know. She's buried here in a cemetery and she died, and whatever it says. Well, that's my mother's parents. Um, it turned out, strangely enough, what happened to all the people that were left. I was in a school of about 24 students. There were 4 of us that survived. I found out later on after the war that all the people who were left, basically all of them, the Jewish people that were left in our town, were deported on March 24th, 1942. I can never forget that day anyway, because March 24th, 1942 was my 13th birthday. It was basically my bar mitzvah. And that's the date almost all of the Jews remaining in the city of Kitzingen and the surrounding area, maybe 80 or some around in Kitzingen, and then the other little villages in the city of Würzburg. There were a few thousand people that were taken away by railroad and shipped east, and with very, very few exceptions, never heard from again. My father had a sister who was working in that old age home in the city of Würzburg, and she was sent to Terrassen, which is also where my father's mother, who was still alive, was sent also. She was 81 years old. She survived till about the late in the year, and how she died, we don't know. Disease, starvation, who can say? So she was close to 82 years of age, and she was basically murdered. My father's sister, the older sister, she was also then shipped to, she was already in Terrassen, and she was shipped to Auschwitz late in 1944, and she was one of the last people to be slaughtered there, I guess, by the Nazi government. My father had a sister who was married to a non-Jewish man, and she was kept alive till about 1944, because they lived in a little town, and the mayor wasn't about to send her away, I guess, until he really supposedly had to. But then the Russians came in and rescued the few survivors at Terrassen, and so she survived the war. As I said, my schoolmates, they all disappeared. I never heard from any, I couldn't hear from any of them again, because they were all shipped out east and killed one way or another in the ovens or the shooting ranges or what have you, or the labor camps of the Nazi government. I think of all the people that were left in the city of Kitzingen, I understand only one elderly lady survived in Terrassen.
Let's see. Next question is, what was the biggest change for you and your family when you came to the U.S., and what brought you to the Chicagoland area?
Yeah, well, what was the biggest change? Well, we were now free. We could go out in the street and not have to worry about somebody beating us up. We could get food. We could enjoy the sun. We could take walks. Back in Germany, we took walks for a while, particularly on the Saturday, on the Sabbath. But then we got to, when the youngsters got to know who we were, when we couldn't really walk with any sense of satisfaction or peace, because we would walk by and they'd call us dirty Jews. We're going to kill you soon as we can. Dirty Jews, and so kids 8, 9 years old. So my father said, what do we have to listen to these insults for? We just won't go walking anymore. Well, once we got to this country, of course, you could walk, you could do things. My father could start up a bakery business again. Where did we come? Well, I was asked that question, where did you go? And I know some of the schools have said, well, we went to Green Bay, Wisconsin. And they gasped, Green Bay, Wisconsin? My God, the Packers. What? Said, yeah, we love cheese. And we were Green Bay Packer fans, is what I would reply. But my mother had a sister whose husband had been in the German Socialist Democratic Party, which means as a Jew, he had 2 counts against him. He was in the wrong party and he was Jewish. And they were going to shoot him actually one day. And my aunt screamed and they decided they better not do that. But the uncle had relatives in this country. and they got enough money together to bring them over here. So my mother's sister, her husband, and their two kids came to this country in 1937. Actually, her son, his aunt's son, Norbert Rosenthal, is the only natural first cousin I have left over here. So he's in Chicago, and they started out in Chicago, couldn't find a job, but then they found a job through a friend in Green Bay, Wisconsin. So when they moved to Green Bay, we joined them in August, September of 1941. That's how we ended up in Green Bay. By the way, there's one other thing talking about Green Bay. When I was at the University of Wisconsin, I think it was in my junior year, a veteran asked me one day, he says, "Where do you come from?" He says, "Ernest, where do you come from?" I said, "Well, Germany." He says, "I know that." He said, "I can tell by your accent." He said, "Where in Germany?" So I told him I lived in the little town of Kitzingen on the Main River. "Oh," he says, "I know that town real well. I drove every week between the two cities of Würzburg and Nuremberg, and I think I even have pictures, a lot of pictures of the town." And I told him, I said, "Well, my father had a great cafe at the corner of Luitpoldstrasse and Falderstrasse, but it was converted to a beer hall by a man whose name was Kesselring. I don't know, we have no idea what happened there." And he said, "Oh, I can tell you that. I even have pictures of that corner." I was flabbergasted. It turned out he had pictures of that very corner. It turned out that city, besides the army base, was an important railroad junction. It was bombed, I think it was in February of 1945, by the British RAF, by the Air Force. And from what I remember, I learned that about 40% of the town was actually destroyed. And two bombs, I would guess, from the looks of things, must hit that building right on, because the building was basically nothing more than rubble. And strangely enough, the building that was built there afterwards was a bank. Those are the people who want to buy the place in the first place. So I always tell people that it shows that the wheels of justice turn. They turn slowly, but they do turn. So a bank finally got there at that corner. By the way, as a matter of interest, my wife and I, we've been back to Germany 4 times. We've met the mayors, a couple of mayors of the city. We've met a lot of people. We've become very close to some of them. And it's a different world, you know. People tell me, "How can you go back there?" I said, "Look, you know, my feelings are about hate. If you don't let go and you hate 2-3 generations later after what happened there, you'll never have peace in this world." So we found it, humanly speaking, very rewarding to go back there. My wife, is, by the way, was also born in Germany, in Western Germany. She was also been invited back, and they have what are called these Stolpersteine, which are stumbling blocks. They call them the concrete blocks with a brass plate on top, which are embedded in the sidewalk in front of people's homes who live there, commemorating the fact that her family, who survived, her parents, her sister, and her mother, her grandmother on the mother's side, came, were born there, and their names are embedded on the sidewalk in front of the little building in this little village where they lived. Okay, how much more time? One more question?
Yeah, we can do 1 or 2 more. Let's see. When did you start speaking about the Holocaust, and why was it important to you to do that?
Oh, let's see. Well, I remember back in the 80s, that back in our federation in Munster, Indiana, the leaders of the federation, because of some anniversary, I don't remember what it was anymore, thought it would be good to talk about what happened. And there was also a man in the community who had a collection of German memorabilia, which he showed. It was kind of depressing. But we talked about things. There were people who came from, who survived the Holocaust in the Soviet Union, and other Germany, other places, in Poland mostly, I shouldn't say Soviet Union, Poland and the area there. and they would talk about it and let people know what happened, because people didn't really want to talk about it. A lot of survivors don't want to talk about it. So I got myself involved. I wasn't going to talk particularly because I was fortunate in that I never had any of the really horrid experiences, and I survived it all. But I was told by, especially by the woman who was the head of the education department, Kelly Zaney, who said to me, you know, you have a knowledge which a lot of people don't have. You grew up under the Nazi system, and you saw what happened as the years went by, and it's good for you to be able to talk and tell people, because you can at least let them know how this whole business of hatred gets started. As I said, it's totally irrational. I talk about it. Does it sink in? Only God knows. I have no way of knowing. It's amazing. I sometimes wish that, as long as we're talking about this subject, that people spend more time reading and studying history, particularly history, study history of the world, about people, how to run governments, how you vote, make sure you vote. You got to make sure that you don't let somebody get in who turns out to be really evil. And you have to participate. You can't let it, you can't let us just drift by and hope that everything will be okay. It is incredible when I learned that Hitler, in all the years that he was involved in his dirty politics, he never got 50% of the vote. I think one year he got 45. Most of the time, he never even got out of the 30s. Until the Depression hit in 1929, he actually had less than 30% support. But he was an evil man with evil intentions, and he did what he did, and it's incredible that all these people in Europe, and Germany was one of the most educated countries in the world, and he got away with it. One of the things I've learned is that to become a hater of some group has nothing to do with your education level. You can have you know from experience, if you look into it, that many of the death camp doctors, the death camp directors, the SS people who were in charge of the evil black-shirted security forces, many of them had doctorates in philosophy. They were experts in music. Yet at the same time, they were the world's worst haters. It has nothing to do with the level of education an individual has. It is incredible, but hatred has no relationship to intelligence, none whatsoever. And I sometimes tell children, you may find when you go off to college that the janitor who sweeps the school halls, the school halls, is a greater and a finer human being than your professor who has 3 doctorates. Okay, one other question, because I have time. But
You do. You talked a lot about how children learn about hate. Can you share some of your favorite stories about love, friendship, and family, and kind of how they can be steered away from learning about hate?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the stories I always end up with is, interestingly enough, a story which comes from Cherokee Indians. I came across this in a magazine some years ago, but it totally reflects what the Jewish belief is about the character of human beings. I was taught when I was in Hebrew school that human beings are born morally neutral. They're neither good nor bad. And the question is, what happens? So this story is, we're told that human beings inside of them and their drives have a drive to be good or a drive to do evil. And the trick is to so train yourself that you only do the good. And now this interesting story says, an old Cherokee chief was teaching his grandson about life. And he said to his grandson, he said, you know, you ask him what's going to happen when you grow up. You have to consider that in your body, there are 2 wolves. The one wolf is a good wolf. He has friends, He's peaceful. He loves his parents. He's respectful of his teachers. He's kind. He's just everything good about that you could expect about a human being. Doesn't upset anybody and so on. The other wolf is exactly the opposite. He's total evil. He hates being around. He's always beating up on somebody. He does not respect his parents or teachers. He's just a bad wolf. And these two fight each other inside of you. And the little grandson says, yeah, but now, wait a minute. Who's going to win the fight? And the grandfather says, which wolf is going to win the fight? The one you feed. There's the one you feed. So what it really says is you have to train yourself to be respectful. And you don't have to tolerate bad behavior, but you don't go around and say a whole group of people are bad, because that's not the way the Lord created the world. If we could teach that, it'd be a long way. Anyway, maybe that's a good time to end. Although I don't mind if people want to stay on and want to keep listening.
We do have a couple more questions.
All right, if you don't mind,
I'm good. Let's see. Courtney's asked, in your opinion, what part of the museum is important for people to visit?
All of it.
It's my wife talking in the back. I would think the most important part, just from the way what I'm talking about here, is probably the beginning of it. I'm sure that most people have some knowledge of the horror that it can take place, that what the things that human beings can do when they totally lose control of their behavior. So the important thing is, how do you avoid that? What do you have to do to make sure that people do the right thing? As individuals in a country where we have representatives representing us at various levels of government, you want to make sure that you know who is running for office. You want to make sure you know as much about them as you can. You want to know what their background is, what their goals are. And after you've studied all this, for God's sake, be sure to go out and vote. You must vote, and you must help others to vote, because ultimately those are the people that are going to run. They're going to run your county, your city, your state, your government. You have to be sure that you get people in there who are decent, honest, and able people. As I said, Hitler almost was out altogether when the country economically began to gain in the late 20s. But then, unfortunately, the Depression came along and everything went up in smoke. But even then, he never had enough votes to get more than 50% of the vote. But because the political system was broken into so many groups, he had the largest group, the greatest vote of any of the groups. It's interesting, you talk about, I'm getting off, maybe not getting off a subject, but it's an interesting sideline. I learned some years ago that, they had a Communist Party, had Social Democratic Party, had the Nazi Party for sure. The Social Democrats realized that if they did not get together with the communists to outnumber the Nazis, they would not be able to get in. Now the Communist Party in Germany, as evil as it is, would not commit to anything without the without the approval of the chief troublemaker, Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin was a man not 1 ounce better than Adolf Hitler, maybe even 2 ounces worse. And he said to them, no, that's not your party. Don't you mix yourself up with these Social Democrats. Let Hitler get in and they'll learn. Well, he learned about as well as anybody what kind of trouble he got himself into. But this is what it shows. You have to be able then to see how you get together to keep bad people out. Well, he muffed that one royally. And of course, Hitler had more votes than either the Communist Party or the Social Democrats. And so Hindenburg finally gave him the authority to be the chief the chief of Germany, of the Bundestag. And you know where all that ended up. Okay, anything else?
One more.
Okay.
It's been asked, can you tell us how you and Ursula met?
Oh, how did we meet? Okay, well, that was a very fortunate thing. Let's see, this December Eve, it'll be, what is it? 50, 48, 68 years ago.
68
Yeah,
years.
I lived in Whiting, Indiana. I worked for, at that time, the Standard Oil Company. And there weren't many Jewish people in Whiting, Indiana, and I was a single man. There were a couple others of us living, working there. So we went to Chicago, south side of Chicago. And it turned out to be, they had these young adult dances. And so we would go to Chicago and join in.
Like synagogues.
Yeah, yes. So we,
Many synagogues.
yeah, so these were usually at temples and synagogues. These young Jewish groups, young people would have a dance. And I went there on December 24th, 1952. And I was looking for somebody who turned out she wasn't there. But I saw Ursula standing out. I didn't know her name or anything. I just saw her there. I still remember what she looked like to this day. She had a brown coat on with a nice fake little fur. And she smiled at me, which is always a good sign, a good sign. So we started dancing, and that was it. That was it. That was a heavenly ordained meeting. So we'll be celebrating our 68th meeting anniversary in another month, God willing.
Yeah.
That's how we met. She lived in Hyde Park.
That's beautiful. That is all the questions we have right now. So I will let you close out.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank you all for turning into Facebook Live to hear my story. I hope you join us again next Wednesday, November at 10 a.m. to hear another story of one of the survivors. Please keep an eye on Illinois Holocaust Museum's Facebook, other social media accounts where there will be a posting of what goes on in the weeks ahead. I want to thank you all for your support during these extraordinary times. And I want to thank Sierra for allowing me to do this presentation with expertise and the least amount of difficulty. So thank you all, and God bless you all. If anybody wants to call me, I should give you my phone number. It's 224-515-8800.